Hello everyone, this is Dr. Sandeep Sharma here. So in this video, I'll be talking about recall questions based upon the pattern of questions asked in pediatrics in the recently concluded INICET November exam. The exam was a bit different from what you have earlier given. So before I start with the discussion of pediatric questions, let us have a brief overview of what exactly happened in the paper. So those who have given the paper as well as those who missed out or those who will be giving later, this information might be slightly useful for you. The general overview was it was a better standard paper than the previous few exams. You all might have seen that the last few INICETs as well as the NEET PG exam, it was more of a one-liner based, less number of clinical scenario based questions were being asked. Overall clinical scenario weightage is increasing, but these were relatively easier papers if you look at the last 2 or 3 papers. That is why the cutoff went so high. But in this paper, relatively better standard was maintained, which was a good thing for those who have prepared well. Secondly, there were more number of images. If you look at the older papers, it was a more conceptual paper rather than simply remembering investigation of choice and drug of choice. It was more conceptual than that. Then there was significant integration. A lot of questions could be taken up by pediatrics, by pathology, by medicine, by pharmacology, and even by radiodiagnosis. So you had a bit of elements in clinical scenarios of multiple subjects. So good quality integration was there. Better clinical scenario based questions had been framed. There were some subjects which were slightly on the tougher side, but overall, the major clinical subjects, which includes medicine, to a certain extent surgery and obs-gynae, also pediatrics, they were slightly on the expected side. So overall, it was a good paper to give, and if you had read textbooks well, you had revised well, you would have done well in the paper. So let us begin with the discussion of pediatric pattern questions. So the first question is, which congenital heart disease is associated with same saturation in all 4 chambers of the heart? Let me give you a clarification here, disclaimer here. Any resemblance to any question being exactly same is not in my hands. It is all based upon the recall which has happened. So which congenital heart disease is associated with same saturation in all 4 chambers of the heart? If you have to remember as a single thing, the answer to this question is C, that is TAPVC. Why? Because among these 4 lesions, TAPVC is considered to be the only lesion which shows total mixing of the oxygenated and deoxygenated blood at the level of right atrium. To understand this, let us briefly discuss about TAPVC. TAPVC has become a very trending, important topic in your exam. If you recall, in the last 2 or 3 papers, which includes NEET PG exam as well, there have been questions asked on TAPVC. We briefly need to know about TAPVC. TAPVC, the name itself is saying total anomalous pulmonary venous connection. So all the 4 pulmonary veins, normally all 4 pulmonary veins, they open into left side of heart. But if all 4 pulmonary veins open into right side of heart, the word total is there. That means that condition is called as TAPVC. Now, if all 4 pulmonary veins open into right atrium or somewhere on the right side, what will happen? There is deoxygenated blood reaching right side of heart. Oxygenated blood is also reaching right side of heart. That all will get mixed. So through that mixed blood in right atrium will be reaching the right ventricle. Similarly, because all 4 pulmonary veins are on the right side in this condition, so because of a right to left shunt which operates at the level of a ASD or patent foramen ovale, some blood will reach left atrium as well as left ventricle. This blood will be reaching after mixing, and so all the 4 chambers of the heart will have similar oxygen saturation. So TAPVC, what are the key points from exam point of view that you need to know? In this condition, all 4 pulmonary veins, they open into right side of heart. All 4 pulmonary veins, they open into right side of heart, right? Since they open into right side of heart, there is complete or total mixing of oxygenated as well as deoxygenated blood, which leads to this mixed right atrial blood will then pass into either the right ventricle or pulmonary artery, or it will pass through atrial septal defect or patent foramen ovale into the left atrium, which will be the only source of systemic blood flow in these patients. And so these patients will have similar oxygen concentration in all 4 chambers, right? TAPVC, depending upon where the pulmonary veins are opening into right side of heart, it is divided into a variety called as supracardiac TAPVC, which is considered to be the most common form. It is an old NEET PG question also. Supracardiac form, where all 4 pulmonary veins open into superior vena cava or innominate vein. Mostly they open into superior vena cava, supracardiac, above the heart. Second variety is cardiac form, where all 4 pulmonary veins open into right atrium or coronary sinus. And the third form will be infracardiac form. Infracardiac form, all 4 pulmonary veins will open into inferior vena cava, hepatic vein or portal vein. Usually there is also a rare form which has been described called as mixed form, where 2 pulmonary veins may be supracardiac, 1 may be cardiac and 1 may be infracardiac and so on, different types of permutation combination, that is called as mixed. Overall most common is supracardiac, overall mildest form is supracardiac, most severe form is infracardiac, and supracardiac and cardiac are also called as non-obstructive TAPVC, because there is no obstruction to the flow of oxygenated blood into these chambers. In infracardiac, there is muscular tissue which is present in the abnormal vessels which are opening, and so it is also called as obstructive TAPVC. This is considered to be the most severe form, and the outcome in infracardiac TAPVC is very poor. They can ask you question in the future exam, which condition has severe cyanosis and always requires surgery in the neonatal period? The answer will be infracardiac. It is a surgical emergency. Whereas the other forms, you can do a planned surgery. Planned surgery does not mean in later life. Planned surgery in the infancy, but they will have a milder cyanosis, and so you can plan surgery over the next 2 months. So this is, and another one liner, supracardiac TAPVC is the one which is associated with, when you look at the heart, it shows an appearance called as snowman appearance. Snowman appearance, or on chest X-ray, also called as figure of 8 or cottage loaf appearance, is seen in these patients. So this is all that you need to know regarding TAPVC, at least the bare minimum points. I am not going into theory because it is mostly a recall based session. So what does Nelson 21st edition say? Whatever I will be mentioning here, quoting here, I will be giving references, because if there is no reference, there is always a doubt. So Nelson says echocardiography should be adequate to demonstrate TAPVR. TAPVC is also called as TAPVR, return, right? In most cases, however, if there is a question about the drainage of 1 or more pulmonary veins, then you do cardiac catheterization, MRI or CT. When you do cardiac catheterization, it shows oxygen saturation of blood in both atria, both ventricles as well as aorta is similar, indicative of a total mixing lesion. This is the line based upon which this question has been framed. It's a tricky question, but this is the kind of question, if you get it right, it gives a big boost to your rank. Let's move further. Look at the next question. Next we come to question number 2. A 14-day-old neonate who had bilateral conjunctivitis now has cough with chest infiltrate. Which among the following is the likely organism? So this is neonatal sepsis, and you have to think of sepsis with pneumonia where there is conjunctivitis also. So all these things are there in the textbooks, but since we don't read textbooks that much these days, we all are in the habit of videos and shortcuts. So this is a question which is actually tricky, but if you have practiced old papers, you would realize that this question is a modified repeat of something which has already been asked in the past. In fact, one of my videos I had already discussed about this clinical scenario. That does not mean I am going to claim that everything comes from my notes. No, I am not going to claim any such thing. Everything comes from textbooks, but what you need to know, what you need to know is, in case you have a child with neonatal sepsis, what are the key points that you need to know? So you will give the heading neonatal sepsis associated with conjunctivitis. It's a very useful flowchart. Based upon this flowchart, already 2 times questions have been asked in the past, one very old, one about 6-7 years back, and again now it has been asked. So neonatal sepsis with conjunctivitis, bilateral conjunctivitis we are talking, there are broadly 2 common possibilities. First is, it is an infection caused by Staph aureus, and secondly it is an infection caused by chlamydia, right? How will you distinguish between them? Staph aureus will be associated with, it produces the typical sepsis. So you will find that in Staph aureus, total leukocyte count will show leukopenia. Secondly, Staph aureus, if you do a chest X-ray, will show features of typical pneumonia, the so-called lobar pneumonia-like features. Right? And here the CRP will be very high. Chlamydia, total leukocyte count will show normal to increased. So, if you have a TLC of 15,000 in a newborn, it is less likely to be Staph aureus because bacterial sepsis tends to produce leukopenia. If it is on the higher side or in the high normal range, you would consider atypical organisms to be present, and chlamydia is a likely possibility. When you do chest X-ray, you will find that there is interstitial infiltrates in these patients on chest X-ray, and the CRP will either be normal to slightly high. So, these are the differences between them, which you must remember for future questions, because this question is being asked every few years. And if you look at the options which are given here, the most likely answer to this question is B, that is chlamydia. Certain students said, sir, option C was not Staphylococcus epidermidis, it was Streptococcus. So, even if it is Streptococcus, it will not change the answer. Overall, most common cause of sepsis with conjunctivitis in newborn is always chlamydia, right? So, answer to question number 2 is B. Moving further, now question number 3. Now, development milestones, there were 2 columns, column A and B were given, and you were supposed to arrange and match. This is all based upon recall, so if there are any changes, you can always point them out later. So, it was a development milestone questions are like, they are totally unexpected. They are like those cricketers who will never play well. Once you dismiss them that they are not going to perform, they will perform extremely well. Like David Warner was not performing at all, he was thrown out of his SRH team in IPL, and then the man came back with a vengeance and simply destroyed all the teams by his batting. So, similarly, milestones are also like that. They may not come in one of the entrance exams, but for every exam you are supposed to read milestones, because they will invariably be asked when you least expect them. So, development milestone, very easy question, no atypical things were asked. First of all, let us start. सबसे पहले क्या आता है? First of all is your social smile, which comes at about 2 months of age. So, D, let us start with sequence. D will be option number 1, that is 1 to 2 months. Then is your second thing, which comes at transferring objects hand to hand, which comes at 5 to 6 months. So, A will be option number 2. Then is your 9 to 11 months is the time during which pincer grasp appears. Immature pincer grasp comes at 9 months, mature pincer grasp comes about 12 months. So your option C will be 3 here, and the only thing we are left here is B, walking 1 to 2 steps. Now, walking 1 to 2 steps, they have not mentioned here based upon recall that whether it is walking with support, without support. See, walking with support, when we say with one hand held, it usually appears at 12 months. So, 12 to 13 months is the best answer here. You can easily reach by marking the other things correct. So, answer to this question is A is 2, B is 4, C is 3 and D is 1. Based upon how it was framed, you can easily reach the correct answer. Next, we have question number 4, dose of dexamethasone for fetal lung maturity to prevent HMD is a very frequently asked thing. What does WHO say? WHO says in antenatal dexamethasone, you should be using intramuscular route. There is a single course of 4 injections of 6 milligram each, administered 12 hours apart. What is that option? 6 milligram 4 doses 12 hours apart. So, question number 4, the answer is B. Please remember that 12 milligram IM 2 doses 24 hours apart is the regime which is followed in betamethasone. Which is better? Dexamethasone is the one which is recommended for these patients. As an extra thing, you can remember, somebody can ask you a question in the future. What are the conditions in which antenatal dexamethasone has proven role in preventing the fetal disease? So, antenatal dexamethasone that is given to mother, it prevents hyaline membrane disease. It also prevents intraventricular hemorrhage in the brain. It also prevents necrotizing enterocolitis, and it also prevents in utero virilization of fetus in patients of congenital adrenal hyperplasia. So, these are the 4 indications where antenatal dexamethasone is strongly recommended to pregnant female. And pregnant female, obviously there are candidate mothers, you will not give randomly. In case there are strong risk factors, there is preterm onset of labor 24 to 34 weeks, then in these patients, in these pregnant ladies, you will give dexamethasone to prevent HMD and so on. So, these are the regimes that you need to remember. Let us move further. Now, next is question number 5. Most common cause of bladder outlet obstruction in a male child. Now, bladder outlet obstruction in a male child, it is a one-liner kind of question already asked in the past. The answer to this question is posterior urethral valve. Posterior urethral valve is a major cause of bladder outlet obstruction in especially male babies. These are the children who will present with dribbling of urine. They will present with abnormal urinary stream. These children will have a palpable bladder, and these children will have a increased risk of UTI, which is often associated with vesicoureteric reflux. Tomorrow they make a case scenario out of it. It will always be a male child who will be presenting with these kind of symptoms. You should suspect PUV. You will perform a micturating cystourethrogram, and the treatment of choice, once you confirm the diagnosis, you will do endoscopic fulguration of the abnormal valves, right? So, these are the things that you need to remember if this question is asked as a clinical scenario for future. Question number 5, the answer is A, posterior urethral valve. Question number 6, characteristic of Langerhans-Cell histiocytosis, earlier called as histiocytosis X. Easy one, the answer is Birbeck granules. Some students said that electron microscopy was mentioned, some said electron microscopy was not mentioned. Irrespective, the answer is Birbeck granules. So, how do Birbeck granules look like? They are an electron microscopic feature which looks something like this. They have a tennis racket appearance with their handle or the shaft showing a zipper like appearance. This is how these Birbeck granules look like. What are the key points about Langerhans-Cell histiocytosis that you need to revise before we move to the next question? So, what exactly is Langerhans-Cell histiocytosis? It is a clonal proliferation. So, it is a clonal proliferation of Langerhans cells and tissue infiltration by histiocytes, right? It is much more common in males compared to females. What is the peak age at which it happens? The peak age is, there is a range given in most of the textbooks, 0 to 15 years. So, it is mainly a pediatric condition. What is the most common site of involvement? It mostly involves bones in 80% cases. Skin is involved in about 60% cases where it produces a seborrheic dermatitis like rash. It can also involve liver, lungs, lymph nodes as well as spleen. These are the other common sites which can be involved. Lymph nodes in fact are involved in about 33% cases. Liver and spleen are involved in about 20% cases. Together they are involved in 15% cases and so on. So, these are the important things. Another important thing which is which can be asked in exam is potential MCQ, pathology related. More than 50% cases of LCH will have a mutation called as BRAF V600E. It is a point mutation in BRAF gene which changes valine to glutamate E at 600 position. This is the mutation present in majority of LCH patients. When you make the diagnosis for LCH, there are two investigations which are separately to be remembered. If you do immunohistochemistry, you will not find Birbeck granules. You will find that the Langerhans cells on immunohistochemistry, they will be positive for CD1A, they will be positive for CD207, which is also called as Langerin. In fact, Nelson says that Langerin is more sensitive than CD1A. If you have to choose one out of these two, CD207 will be the better answer. Third is S100 positivity, and fourth is they have MHC2, that is HLA-DR positivity. Whereas, when you do electron microscopy, you will find the presence of Birbeck granules, right? Birbeck granules will have a tennis racket shape and they will have a handle zipper or zipper handle appearance. So, let us move to the next question. Which of the following diseases is associated with impaired collagen maturation? The answer to this is pretty straightforward. It is vitamin C, which is involved not only in the formation of collagen, but also in cross-linking of collagen, conversion of pro-collagen into collagen, and stabilization of collagen fibrils. So, in these patients, in case vitamin C is deficient, scurvy is there, you will find that there is impaired wound healing, plus the osteoid matrix of the bone does not form. So, the patient tends to develop various types of X-ray changes, as you might have read so far. So, answer to question number 7 is B. So, what do the textbooks and journals say? The vitamin C is important in forming a normal mature collagen network in the humans. It has anti-scurvy properties by preventing the auto-activation of lysyl and prolyl hydroxylase. So, it is not only a cofactor for these hydroxylases, but it also prevents the auto inactivation, and so it plays a role in maturation and post translational modification as well. Question number 8. Child presented with proptosis due to chloroma. Next investigation to make the diagnosis is. Now, what exactly is a chloroma? Chloroma is also called as granulolytic sarcoma. It is a extramedullary collection of tumor cells mainly seen in patients of AML. AML M2 variety is particularly associated. Now, if you go back into classification, there is a FAB classification. AML M2 is the form in which myeloperoxidase is strongly present. Myeloperoxidase is green in color because these tumors, once they were early part of 20th century when they were discovered, they were found to have leukemic cells. They produced a strong green refringence. Strong green staining, and because of that the name chloroma was mentioned. But now we know that about 2/3 are green, about 1/3 are not green, but the term has stuck around. Chloromas most commonly have a tendency to form in bones, particularly orbital bones. They can also form in skin, where they are called as so-called leukemia cutis. They can form in neck as well. Other than that, they can form in any soft tissue. Now, what is the problem with this condition? If you go by standard textbooks, they say that chloromas, if they occur in orbit, they can cause proptosis. Sometimes it is unilateral, sometimes bilateral proptosis can also be produced. When you try to do directly bone marrow biopsy, or when you try to do the total leukocyte count alone, you will find that many of these patients are so-called aleukemic. They have a leukemic phase of leukemia. What do I mean by this? That is, the total WBC count has still not increased much. Many times bone marrow aspiration is also negative. You may miss some degree of blast cells, but if you do peripheral smear is able to pick up blast cells, ironically, even if your TLC is normal. All the latest research, all the latest guidelines, they say that in patients who have bilateral proptosis and you are suspecting chloroma, first line investigation is a peripheral blood smear. So, as it is mentioned, the diagnosis of this tumor can be challenging, especially when there are no signs of systemic leukemia. In the presence of systemic malignancy, a peripheral blood smear or a bone marrow biopsy, not aspiration, biopsy, may provide useful clues to the diagnosis. Now, what is mentioned here among these options? The best answer here is peripheral blood film, right? And before I go further, if somebody asks you what next, you have diagnosed chloroma, any special treatment needs to be given? No. Whatever chemotherapy you are giving for AML, that will take care of chloroma also, right? Question number 9. A boy presented with bilateral cervical lymphadenopathy. Image was provided, as you can see, exact image, I don't know whether it was similar or not. Identify the abnormal cell, viral pathogen associated, and diagnosis. So, this is a typical owl eye appearance of Reed-Sternberg cells. They are associated with Epstein-Barr virus, and the diagnosis is Hodgkin lymphoma. I hope most of you have got it correct. So, the answer to this question is A. What are the key points about this that you need to know? Remember that according to Harrison as well as Nelson, Epstein-Barr virus increases the risk of Hodgkin lymphoma by 4 folds. So, 4 times risk is increased. And what is the most important component which is implicated of EBV in producing lymphoma? It is latent membrane protein 1 and 2. LMP1 and 2, the proteins of EBV are implicated in producing this malignant transformation. Additionally, what is the association with EBV in various types of Hodgkin lymphoma? Again, a potential MCQ. So broadly you can remember like this, that Hodgkin lymphoma is broadly divided into two categories. You have the classic disease and you have the atypical disease, which is called as nodular lymphocyte predominant form. Okay. Now the classical disease is usually CD15 positive and CD30 positive, whereas nodular lymphocyte predominant form is CD15 negative, CD30 negative, it is CD20 positive and CD45 positive. It is negative for CD15 and CD30. Now classic disease has multiple other forms. Classic disease first variety is nodular sclerosis form. In nodular sclerosis, they are usually negative for Epstein-Barr virus. So they do not show association with Epstein-Barr virus. Then is the form called as mixed cellularity, which is very common in India. Mixed cellularity form is the most common form in India. It is 70% cases are associated with Epstein-Barr virus. Third form is your lymphocyte rich form, which has the best prognosis among all the forms. So lymphocyte rich form, you will find 40% cases to be EBV positive. And then you have lymphocyte depletion form. Lymphocyte depletion form, 90% cases are found to be EBV positive. If you talk about nodular lymphocyte predominant, again they are usually negative for Epstein-Barr virus. So which is positive, which is negative, and what are the percentages are additional things that you can need to remember for future questions if they are asked in exam. Moving further, an easy one, hepatitis B subunit vaccine is derived from. The answer, it's a one-liner thing, HBsAg. The hepatitis B vaccine that is used, it contains surface antigen HBsAg, which is produced by recombinant DNA technology in yeast, and it is adsorbed on aluminum salts as adjuvant. This is something you already know. You must have read in microbiology, PSM, pediatrics also, sometimes medicine people also teach it. So easy one. What is important is they can ask in the future regime. National immunization schedule was earlier slightly different from IAP schedule. Now the latest IAP schedule has also conformed to national immunization schedule. Hepatitis B vaccine should be given at birth, at 6 weeks, at 10 weeks, at 14 weeks. Birth, it is given isolatedly like as a standalone thing. 6 weeks, 10 weeks, 14 weeks, it is given as a part of pentavalent vaccine, right, as a component of pentavalent vaccine. Let's move further. Causes of neonatal seizures include, and multiple options were correct. The options which were provided were hypocalcemia, hypomagnesemia, hyponatremia, hypernatremia. Now this question is directly taken from a table which is given in Avery's neonatology. Don't worry, you don't need to read Avery's neonatology table. Similar thing is mentioned in Nelson and various other texts also. But I'll first like to show you those tables here, and then we'll talk about what are the things that you need to remember. So this is the table. Now this is my finger and I am pointing at this table. Why it is not a, why I have not taken a snapshot? Because this is the latest edition of Avery, whose PDF file is still not available in the market. So table 65.2, differential diagnosis of seizure etiology. Let me highlight it. See, what does it say? Neonatal seizures it is talking about. So in metabolic derangement, it says the causes, there are 5 important causes which are among the most common causes, right, among metabolic causes. So we have hypoglycemia, hypocalcemia, hypomagnesemia, hyponatremia and hypernatremia. So both increased and decreased sodium can produce seizures in children. Hypokalemia will not be a cause. Now, it was not mentioned, but again it's something which you need to remember for future, right. In addition, they have mentioned about meningitis, encephalitis, torch infections, and they have talked about drug withdrawals and cerebrovascular lesions. So you can just go through the list. The important point is all the 4 options are correct. In addition, I'll also like to show you this thing. Future questions can be asked. Inborn errors of metabolism can also cause neonatal seizures, which includes but particularly seen in glycine encephalopathy, amino acidopathies, urea cycle defects, pyridoxine dependent epilepsies, and then they have talked about some genes which are associated with particular types of neonatal seizures. You need not go into details, but if the exam approaches and you are specifically targeting INI-CET exam, a bit extra, a bit something which is a favorite of examiners that you need to know. If you look at last 5, 6, 7 AIIMS papers or oblique INI CET papers, you will find a trend. AIIMS people usually ask questions in pediatrics. There is always one congenital heart disease. There is always 1 or 2 questions on vaccines. There is always 1 or 2 questions on neonatal seizures. There is always 1 or 2 questions on either neonatal sepsis or neonatal jaundice, and there are questions asked from your protein energy malnutrition. This time there was no direct question, they asked simply about scurvy being there. So, overall it was a solvable thing. Out of the 11 questions which we have discussed, at least 9 should have been correct at your end. So, answer to question number 11, it is hypocalcemia, hypomagnesemia, hyponatremia as well as hypernatremia. If somebody asks you कि सबसे rare क्या है इन चारों में, the most rare among these 4 will be hypernatremia, but that is based upon the underlying etiologies. Overall, all 4 have been mentioned in Nelson table also, but not as implicitly as shown in this picture. So, I hope all of you have done well. End of the day, it's just an exam, don't take it too hard, we all make silly mistakes. What this exam reinforces is, you need to have a balanced approach, you need to understand what you're doing, try to practice as many MCQs as possible, especially of the exam which you are targeting, and do not miss out on expected topics. So, this is all about the pediatric discussion. Thank you very much.